Greetings, America. It is Friday, the 8th of January, 2021. It's Friday evening. I've just finished a day at work. That was interesting. I'm glad to be back at work. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff going on um, that I will try to address in as short as possible because I know watching long-handed videos can be tiresome. Um, what I often do is I'll sometimes put like these types of videos that I find on YouTube, I'll put them on in the background and listen. So maybe some of you do that, maybe some of you don't. Who knows? Don't care. There's only like 5 or 6 of you that watch these, so it is what it is. Maybe you're my chosen crowd. So obviously, on the 6th, we had the events. I personally know some people that were at the events in DC. And tragically, you have to be objective and you have to address this objectively. Now, people who are left leaning, Democrat supporters, etc., who claim that BLM or anybody else for that matter initiates a peaceful, lawful protest, whether they pulled permits or not, but then outside agitators, outside actors, people sponsored by unknown sources show up, and it's their purpose and their duty to initiate chaos, initiate violence, initiate mob rule and unrest, and so on and so forth. Well, essentially the same thing happened to the protest in DC, and I have it from at least two viable sources that were there. I mean, I can't confirm it because I wasn't there, but according to two people I personally know that were there, uh, on their own accord, they can confirm that the people initiating the violence, the people initiating essentially the break-in on the Capitol building, were not acting on behalf of the peaceful protesters. They were acting on their own. And then, depending on which news source you follow or believe or whatever the case may be, some of the people who have since then been making the rounds in the more popular shape, like the Barbarian Man and whatnot, I've seen a couple of different sources that he is an actor for hire, and since then has been hired by somebody to act as an agitator at these events. And then I've also heard and seen that some of these people uh, posing as Trump supporters, acting as a Trump supporter or whatnot, initiating and instilling violence, creating riots and mob rule, were not actual Trump supporters. So tragically, there's a lot of truth to what's been said from left-leaning supporters that people are hijacking peaceful protests. So I guess it does go both ways. But a friend of mine who will remain nameless posted something on his Facebook feed that I found quite interesting. And if I didn't openly say it, then I'll say it now. I I was a Trump supporter. I did find some of his actions and rhetoric to be very difficult to get behind, as in the personality of the man who was Trump was oftentimes very difficult to get behind. However, I still looked more towards the substance of what he did. I will freely admit his first debate in the presidential election against Joe Biden was horrific. It was between the two of them, it was about the equivalent of a middle school verbal slugfest. In the second debate, I thought he comported himself much better and he did a much better job. Um, my concerns with Joe Biden are that he's essentially a puppet figure for the Democratic Party because I'll be completely honest, there were better Democratic candidates that would have made a better run for the presidency than him. So I'm not really sure why they put all their money into him, but there's other people out there that have done commentary, more importantly, people who have interviewed Tulsi Gabbard. Aside from being quite the nice looking woman, the fetching young lady that she is, um, she is rather moderate. She's a little more center left than anything else, and she was a fantastic candidate. But the Democrats, the hardened Democrats, drummed her out. But that's not the whole topic of this here. Um, Again, I was a bit of a Trump supporter because I'm very anti-Democrat. Once I was able to start educating myself, I became very anti-democrat. And a couple of friends of mine have likened it to, for people that qualify for minority status, as in other than white, so people of color, specifically the black community. When you consider what happened to the black community, literally in the South, um, pre Civil War and even post Civil War up until the 1960s, it's about the equivalent of European Jews voting for the Nazi Party because somehow somebody's convinced them that they've really changed. And I've said this numerous times, and I apologize if I'm being repetitive. Do I believe that the Democratic Party is the spitting image of the Democratic Party of the Confederacy and the Democratic Party post-Civil War for the first 100 years? No. I don't think that the Kamala Harrises and the Maxine Waters and so on and so forth are active Klans members, burning crosses and whatnot. But I don't think that as a whole, Democratic policies do much to support America, let alone Americans, and don't do anything to help anybody. It's basically the equivalent of, we're going to steal fish from the fishermen and give to those who just refuse to fish. Hopefully you catch that reference. So real quick here, I just want to read this and, open it up for discussion. So, this post is not open for debate. I have listened to everyone else's hatred, rhetoric, and outright lies for the last 40 years. So now I'm having my say. If you don't like it, you know where the delete button is. Please unfriend me. Let me be clear, I am not a Biden fan. I think he is corrupt, a liar, a racist bigot, is in bed with China, and probably suffering from dementia. He has done nothing to improve anything in his 47-year political career. To be clear, I think I've looked it up, and he's actually only been in politics 44 years, 8 of which was as the VP. But the statement still makes sense. If he hasn't accomplished anything in 44 years, what's 40 years as president going to do? So what has Trump done in the past 4 years? The arrogant in the White House brokered 4 Middle East peace accords, something that 71 years of political intervention and endless war failed to produce. The buffoon in the White House is the first president that has not engaged us in a foreign war since Eisenhower. The racist in the White House has had the greatest impact on the economy, bringing jobs and lowering unemployment to the black and Latino population of any other president ever. The liar in the White House has exposed the deep, widespread, and long-standing corruption in the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and both Republican and Democratic parties. The white supremacist in the White House turned NATO around and had them start paying their dues. Essentially, they're from somebody with a military background. For a country that was enrolled in NATO with several other countries, it was almost as if we were paying our share based on the cubic square footage of the country, or the square mileage of our country. The amount that we were paying into NATO compared to all other quote-unquote participants, ridiculous. All right, where'd I go? Okay. The fool in the White House neutralized the North Koreans and stopped them sending missiles towards Japan and threatening the west coast of the U.S. Yeah, pretty accurate. Previous presidents, what they would end up doing is, when Kim Jong-un would start, throwing a fit because he would run out of supplies, couldn't take care of his country, he'd start throwing a fit, a temper tantrum, launching missiles, and previous presidents were like, what do you need? Here's some rice, here's some money, go back home and play with your own toys. President Trump was like, no, not going to play that game. The xenophobe in the White House turned our relationship with the Chinese around, brought hundreds of businesses back to the U.S., and revived the economy. Basically, he made it, I wouldn't say easier, but more beneficial for companies to do manufacturing and do business in the U.S. versus sending their business and production outside the U.S. and paying the import tax. All right. This same clown lowered your taxes, increased the standard deduction on your IRS return from $12,500 to $24,000 for married couples, and caused the stock market to rise to record levels, positively impacting the retirement accounts of tens of millions of citizens. I don't know enough to argue that. The idiot in the White House fast-tracked the development of multiple COVID vaccines, which are now available or will be soon. And yet we still don't have vaccines for SARS, bird flu, Ebola, or a host of diseases that arose during previous administrations. I will say this, we did have other quote-unquote scares or pandemics, but we never dealt with them quite the same way we did this one. The only major difference, the presidency. We can argue that one all day long if you want to. I'm more than happy to do so. That's the whole point of this thing, is debate, discuss, have a conversation, and still demonstrate that we can be civil to one another and not dehumanize each other for having a difference in opinion. The orange man in the White House rebuilt our military, which the Obama administration crippled, and fired 214 key generals and admirals in his first year of office. If I read that correctly, they're stating Obama fired these people. I don't know. Typically speaking, in the last several decades, Democrats have been bad for the military. I got it. You don't like him. Many of you utterly hate and despise him. How special of you. He is serving you and all the American people. What are you doing besides calling him names and laughing about him catching the China virus? Some of you were even hoping that COVID would be the cause of his demise. And then it says, the left, the party of tolerance. Interestingly enough, the party who supports all these other groups or whatnot that demand tolerance tend to be very intolerant themselves. Interesting, right? Please educate me again as to what Biden has accomplished for America in his X amount of years in office, besides making the whole Biden family richer. By the way, where is Hunter? Yeah, I mean, it's not a stretch of the imagination to imagine that, people who go into politics, if they weren't corrupt, they become corrupt, and it goes back to that saying, I'm not so much worried about the billionaires' tax returns who became a political figure. I'm more worried about the political figures who became millionaires and billionaires. I'd like to see their tax returns. I digress. I'll take the clown any day versus a fork-tongued, smooth-talking, hypocritical, racist, corrupt liar. I want a strong leader who isn't afraid to kick some butt when needed. I don't need a fatherly figure. I don't need a liar. That's what Hollywood, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, New York Times, Huffington Post, and the Wall Street Journal are for. Call me a chump, a racist, a super spreader, or part of the basket of deplorables. I don't care. And then it goes on to say, God bless Donald Trump, one of, if not the most, unappreciated presidents in the U.S. So, yes, not a religious person necessarily, so I don't want to necessarily jump off on that end. I will admit that, and I think any objective person has to admit that from a personal standpoint, his conduct, rhetoric, and demeanor has basically isolated him in the court of public opinion. So pretty much every great thing he's done, because he didn't conduct and comport himself like any previous long-term career-level politician who's become president, or because you can't really say that about Barack Obama, but Barack Obama, I think, was groomed from day one, ever since he was the MC of the Democratic National Convention in 2004. But again, sidebar, not important. I get it. Donald Trump was very rough to deal with, from his social media presence to, just some of his rhetoric. I think Ben Shapiro recently posted something on his channel where, people who want to hold Donald Trump directly accountable for what took place in Washington, D.C., from a legal standpoint, you cannot hold him directly accountable, just like you can't hold Barack Obama directly accountable for what happened on his watch. Now, as Ben Shapiro puts it, you can hold President Trump accountable for raising the temperature. So, where the president has an opportunity to lower the temperature of a hot situation, the president also is in a position where he or she can raise the temperature of a hot topic issue. And just like Barack Obama did at the beginning of all of this, 100% cops are racist against the black community. They're targeting the black community. They're specifically waking up in the morning to go to work and kill black people. And the spawn of the Black Lives Matter movement. Barack Obama had a couple of opportunities during some key events to lower the temperature, and he didn't. He spoke and he said things that raised the temperature, but does that make him directly accountable for the actions that took place, like BLM supporters going out and ambushing and killing cops, or like when that Bernie Sanders supporter went out and shot up the Congress at their charity baseball game? You can't necessarily hold Bernie Sanders directly responsible for that, but could Bernie Sanders have done stuff that could have eased that situation? It's possible. And leave it to Ben Shapiro, who's much younger than me, to be the wise man to say that. um I've never been a big fan of Democrats, but I don't want to necessarily dehumanize them. What I find extremely interesting is the overwhelming majority of people I probably went to high school with that I still have on Facebook. The overwhelming majority of them are belligerently left-leaning Democrats. And the only thing I can come up with is, growing up in that area, I remember the extreme sense of white guilt and the extreme sense of shame we felt on our country for what took place in areas of the country that excluded ours. Because we grew up in Chicago. Chicago was not a segregated city as part of a segregated state, as part of a slave state pre-Civil War. So I remember growing up with that theme. I remember in high school the resurgence of Black Pride with all the Malcolm X T-shirts and the "It's a black thing, you just wouldn't understand," and all the references to Africa and stuff like that. I remember growing up with that. And you have to understand too, I was, I think, seventh or eighth grade when NWA came out with Straight Outta Compton. So I remember all the Spike Lee movies and whatnot. I remember all this stuff. And I don't know if what some of my friends from high school in Illinois are still clinging to is that sense of guilt, or whatever it is. I really don't know. When I was in high school, I took a science class, and we were, discussing several issues, and the teacher made a statement. He said, a lot of it is NIMBY, NIMBY, not in my backyard, where people don't usually care about something until it begins to affect them and they have to care. If it's not in your backyard, then you don't care. Where I think a lot of people may or may not have a political opinion, but based on how it actually affects their day-to-day life, like, does it impact your ability to go to work? Does it impact your ability to earn a living? Most people, if it's a percentage or two on their taxes and a percentage or two on their tax return, they probably don't care. So, they're more inclined to go with the socially trending status quo. Hey, hun, what are we doing again? I think according to, Bobby and Debbie, we're going to hate Trump. Okay, fine, we hate Trump. Is that the popular thing to do? Yeah, yeah, it's the popular thing to do. We're going to hate Trump. Okay, so we hate Trump. I don't know that many people put a whole lot of brain power into formulating their opinions, and some might. And I do know from my walks in life, I have met some really, really good people who, in spite of a lot of their deep-rooted personal beliefs, some of them are single issue voters, where in spite of their best judgment, because of certain issues, they end up voting for the party that supports them. And I think for years, I was in a very similar position where I think somebody influenced me when I was much younger, and it's like, Republicans, good, good for the military. Democrats, bad, bad for the military. And while that's terribly ignorant, um, it begins the domino effect. Well, Bill Clinton was a Democrat. Bill Clinton cheated on his wife. Bill Clinton got caught cheating on his wife. We could literally get punished and go to the brig while serving in the military if we cheat on our spouses and we get caught. But yet this is the commander-in-chief, the guy who's literally in control of all the armed forces. And because of the way we're set up, when I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, the president does not need congressional approval to send the United States Marine Corps anywhere to do anything. In order to send a standing army anywhere, that requires a declaration of war, which requires approval from Congress. You can send the United States Marine Corps anywhere to kick in anybody's doors and hurt anybody's feelings as the commander-in-chief. And as the commander-in-chief, our commander-in-chief committed adultery, got caught, and it was like no big deal. Yet if we commit adultery and get caught, if you're lucky, you get non-judicial punishment and you potentially lose a stripe or two and some pay. Worst case scenario, you go to a court-martial, and depending on what level court-martial, you might end up in the brig, you might end up with a felony conviction, because any violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice is subject to a court-martial. So, you know, again, my own political journey, I made that video and I built on it, but do I think Biden's the way forward? No. Do I think he's going to survive his presidency? Maybe not. I don't know enough about him medically, but I just get the overall impression based on some things that I've seen. He's not going to survive his presidency. Either A, the Democrats are not going to get in the way of a Republican-based impeachment over whatever he's got going on with his son Hunter, or B, the Democrats might actively support a non-compos mentis push by the Republicans. I could be wrong, though, because now that the Democrats own the House, they split the Senate, and Kamala Harris is the deciding vote in the Senate. I could be wrong. Joe Biden might survive. But as I suspect, while the Democrats have this limited opportunity of power, I think it'll max out at about 2 years before there has to be another election, and that may be Congress and senators alike. But I think for the next 2 years, while the Democrats have that amount of power, we might see some high-level stupidity, in which case this thing ebbs and flows. In which case, when there's a new election, you might see a lot of Democratic elected leaders pushed out. But I've been saying this over and over and over again. Whether it was us in the now or our founding fathers, our founding society, we created a government to protect our freedoms that are inherently ours. Now, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole about how we treated everybody, you know, as far as ethnicity, etc. The bottom line is, if you're an American, we created government to protect and to preserve our freedoms that are inherently ours. One of the reasons we have a Second Amendment, which I know is a hot button issue, is to prevent elected leaders from accumulating too much power. The goal is they're supposed to represent us and be fearful of us because we have the power to vote. We have the power to put them in position or take them out of position. We are not supposed to be fearful of them. And until Americans can wrap their head around that, I don't get it. There should be absolutely no reason why we have these two superpowers, Democrat and Republican. If we're completely dissatisfied with both of them, it is entirely up to us to change it. We don't have to vote for either one of them. We can start looking at alternate parties. The only problem with that is when you don't agree with alternative party candidates to such a high level, it makes it very difficult to vote for them. But nevertheless, that's well within us, okay? The government is supposed to fear us. And the only positive thing, and I'm stretching this, okay? Take this under for a grain of salt. I'm stretching this. The only positive thing that came out of the events of January 6th is anybody that was caught in the Capitol building that felt a sense of fear from the otherwise unelected voting public, that's what you're supposed to feel. You're supposed to feel that. How that all went down, how that all took place, I don't agree with. But elected officials feeling a sense of fear, feeling a sense of, that's what you're supposed to feel. You're supposed to feel that because the only power you have is the power we give you. Don't like it? It is what it is. If you disagree with anything I've said, if you want to challenge anything I've said, or if you want to continue this conversation, that's the whole point of these videos. I've only had one person do it, so I'm looking for more. Please get involved. Please participate in the conversation. I don't care if we disagree. I'm not looking to dehumanize you. I'm not looking to tear you down. We may disagree. We may disagree passionately. I may not see things eye to eye with you, but I still recognize your value as a person. I still recognize your value as a contributing member of our society. I still recognize your value as an American, but we don't have to agree all the time. But we can be civil, and we should demand more of our elected leaders. That being said, please get involved in this conversation. If not, hit like, hit dislike, hit the subscription button, hit the little notification bell if you want to be notified when there's more of this. And again, please just get involved and let's have this conversation.